Hi guys, I'm just after recording an episode of the podcast with Evan Lynch. He's a registered dietitian, and we talk about his background very little, and then we just get straight into some gold. If you're getting ready for a marathon and you want to know what kind of gels you should use, what kind of timing strategies you should use, if you've had issues with gels, what you can do instead. We talked about how you could maybe carbo-load effectively before races, what you might do after training to make sure you're recovering correctly. I'm going to probably change one or two of my routines based on what we had. So I hope you really enjoy this episode. Just as you know, the episode is going to be sponsored by Everard Pilates. If we have a free book, everardpilates.com/book. It's get to the line in the best shape possible, and you can get a free trial of our sports Pilates at everardpilates.com/sport free trial. Okay, enjoy the episode. Hi guys, and welcome. And this week we have Evan Lynch. Really delighted to get Evan on. If I was going to get anyone, he'd be my number one for nutrition. So Evan Lynch, he is a registered dietitian, really specializes in running and long distance running and nutrition. So would have known him, would come across him from other athletes that I would have known. He has a podcast on Spotify called the Fuel Better Podcast. So really recommend checking out some really interesting stuff. But again, I just said to Evan, I don't want to spend too much time on who he is. You're going to see that the knowledge he's dropping here, that it's worth checking out. What's your email address, or your website, just so people can check it out just before we start?
Yeah, it's www.evanlynchfitnut.com.
Perfect. And we'll have that in the show notes. He's just starting a PhD as well in the place where I work, SETU. So looking forward to seeing him around the place. Okay, so we're really going to focus this initially on marathon preparation. So on the week before, and then we might have some more general questions. So I put this out to my Pilates group. We got some good questions. So we're going to start with there. Okay, so first question was, could we ask about time frame between drinking Maratón 320 drink and taking the first gel? Or how should you leave between taking the drink and starting long run or marathon? This woman got caught out with cramps later in the run and was wondering, did I take too many calories in too quickly between the drink and then the gels every 30 minutes ish? So just on that, is the Maratón, I don't know how we say that, is that the gel of choice that you recommend and what is your ideal fueling strategy for a marathon?
Yeah, so simple enough question to start, but there's actually a load of things there, and I'll quickly cover all of them. Number one, Maurten is not my number one gel of choice. Maurten is a hydrogel, so it has hydrogel tech in it, which says it improves gastric emptying rate and minimizes risk of gut discomfort during running. It's never been substantiated. It's just a very expensive gel with some wild marketing claims. I tend to stick to your high fives or your MyProtein gels. Simple, plain, does the job. What we're trying to achieve when marathon running is hitting 60 to 75 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And to be honest, there's a couple of ways you can achieve that goal. What I tend to default to is advising people to take a gel every 30 minutes from the off. So if you're a 3-hour runner, it means you get 5 gels. If you're a 4-hour runner, it means you get 7 gels. And then taking 1 or 2 mouthfuls of water, preferably an isotonic sports drink, though logistically on race day, that's not always feasible. There are 4 stops with Lucozade Sport in Dublin Marathon course. Otherwise, you're stuck with water unless you carry a bladder bag.
Do you know where they are? At what spots?
I do, actually. Mile 9.5, mile 13, say mile 16 or 17, and mile 21/22, somewhere in there.
And are they the appropriate times to take those isotonic like a Lucozade on those miles?
Yeah, well, to be honest, my default advice for anyone on is get liquid every 20 minutes. So would that could be 3K for some people, it could be every 5K for others. If it happens to be that 20 minutes elapses that you get between one Lucozade Sport Stop to another, I would say go for it every time.
Okay.
Generally speaking, we want to avoid only plain water in an endurance event like a marathon or anything longer. You want to get as much carbohydrates in the door as possible, especially if it's in the form of an isotonic, because that's going to provide some sodium as well, which again can be a bit of a challenge logistically. And I just want to point out, the lady asking the question mentions cramps. Now, unfortunately, she doesn't specify if it's gut cramps or whether it's muscle cramps, but maybe you can verify this one. Muscle cramps during exercise are predominantly not nutrition related. They're really not even related to hydration, which people think they are. If you have a calf cramp or a hamstring cramp, that's localized. That should tell you that it's not dehydration, because that's a systemic problem. You can't be just dehydrated in your left calf or right quad. So a lot of people tend to blame electrolyte disturbances on cramping. They're only a very small part of the picture. What's more relevant is carb intake. So we see when people don't eat enough carbohydrates, they're much more prone to cramping. But after that, it's conditioning. It's, are you accustomed to lactate buildup? Are you tolerating that very well? More so your end of the spectrum. You were gonna
Yeah,
ask.
I just have a few questions there.
Yeah.
Newbie to being I usually getting interviewed. So, but this is great. And as I said, I wanted you on for this. So, okay. First thing, we're taking every 30 minutes as a general guide, and we could practice that. We're taking a gel. And as you said, the goal is like 60 to 75 grams per hour. Maybe the high five ones or the simpler gels, because you're not paying for the marketing. I love that. I think that's great advice. Secondly, so if we have a gel and you're trying to take a couple of swings of water, but what's your water intake? You're saying every 20 minutes then. So it's like, so are you trying, so like say if you take a sip, you might take just a couple of sips. How much are you taking on each station then? And then presumably your idea is that you're nearly hitting every station. You're either taking a few sips of water or electrolytes if it's there, or like isotonic, like your Powerade or Lucozade, and then you're taking a couple of sips of water with your gel just to make it go down easier.
Yeah. So firstly, I tend to advise people go for something like a high five aqua gel, because it already is quite liquidy. It's not very viscous. So you don't need to take anything with that. And that has 23 or 24 grams of carbs in it. So you can take that in isolation. You don't have to take water with a gel. To be honest, the bigger the bolus of fluid in total you're taking at any given moment, the more likely you are to experience problems.
Yeah.
So in the research, even from a hydrating perspective, the most optimal pattern for fluid ingestion is 1 to 200 mils every 20 minutes. And that tends to correlate with most runners' tolerance for fluid intake. It's somewhere between 500 and 700 mils per hour. You go over that running, you start to experience a fair whack of discomfort. So that's where the guideline comes from. It covers the vast majority of people. Though I have worked with an anonymous Olympic marathon runner who has a sweat rate of 3 liters an hour.
Okay.
He'd nearly have to have an IV stuck into him when he's doing the marathon to stay hydrated.
Yeah.
But that's an example of like the very far end of the spectrum. Most people you and I are going to come across, that works perfectly well.
Do you recommend on that, and then we'll get back to these, do you recommend any of those sweat tests to try find that out about yourself?
I'll tell you what, this is how I know I'm an ethical practitioner, right? I actually launched sweat testing services about 6 months ago. And since then, new research has come to light to say that probably not as useful as you think. So I disbanded the service. Here's the deal. If you do let's say a sweat test now for like sweat rate, whatever you test at now, it's likely going to be different on race day, or the more trained you are, or if you implement any heat adaptive responses, sauna usage, thermal layering. Even if the humidity is different, your sweat rate will be different. So it has this is a research term, it has very low validity.
Okay, yes.
If you do a sweat test today and then you go race, well and good, then it's relevant and you can use that data. So that's your sweat rate. That's something athletes do check, and anyone I'm working with, we do a sweat test periodically to make sure our hydration guidelines are on the ball. What's a little bit more concerning is the sodium sweat test, where you can actually check the sodium concentration of your sweat. What do you think will be the biggest reason someone would have a high sodium sweat rate?
I would imagine either that they don't sweat that much like liquid out, so that the concentration's higher. Or I'm not really sure. Maybe they're taking on a lot more kind of sodium.
The biggest reason someone would lose a lot of sodium, or if they do a sodium sweat test, that they would have a high sodium loss, it's related to recent sodium intake. So if you have a typical Western diet, they're going to have a high sodium loss. High being anywhere above 1800 milligrams an hour. That's high. Low is about 400 milligrams an hour. So you can see huge variability there for athletes. With that, the more trained you become, the more heat adapted you become, your sodium sweat losses with heat adaptation, which can be sauna usage over a 3-week period, it can be thermal layering, it can be a heat camp in Fuerteventura. Your sodium sweat loss is reduced by about 85%. So most people dramatically and grossly overconsume electrolytes peri-workout and in racing scenarios. And all it does is it makes if you take sodium tablets or capsules, makes you have slightly higher risk of having mouth ulcers. Or if you're someone who's prone to gut issues, salt and sodium products or electrolyte products have a really high osmolarity. So worst case scenario, it actually elicits gut problems for you when you're kind of peak effort. And interestingly enough, if you can't drink 70% of your fluid losses, and just anecdotally from my client cohort, they tend to be somewhere around 1 liter an hour of sweat. That's pretty standard. If you're doing a marathon and you're drinking 400 to 600 mils, you're doing well. If there's that kind of mismatch where you're drinking less than 70% of your losses, your serum sodium levels rise anyway. So you don't need anything any stronger than an isotonic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to think. So we're thinking, as you said, just because of that variability and diet, that these sweat tests wouldn't be as good. And I think that's a really good sign. It's like one of the hardest things I see for any practitioners, be them like physios, be them, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And even if you find out that like a screw is better, you just do not want to hear it. You're very emotionally invested in something. So that's excellent to hear. Okay, so we're doing the marathon. If I'm getting advice off you, we're taking little sips of water at the 20, and we're not taking too much. So we're taking tiny sips. We're having one of the gels. We don't even have to take a water with them, because if we went for the high five aqua gel, that has enough in it to get down anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're swimming. One thing with that now, obviously it's coming up to the Dublin Marathon at this time, but say prep beforehand. Okay, so people will probably do marathons in the future. When do you start using those gels to get used to them? Do you start once you get up past 2 hours on your runs, 90 minutes?
So I work off of carb targets per hour of exercise. So let's say you're doing a session that's up to 60 minutes easy. You need nothing in that session. Maybe fluids if you have a massive, monstrous sweat rate. If you're between 60 and 90 minutes, carb requirements are 30 to 45 grams per hour. So as soon as your long run is up to, what would that be for most people, 10 to 15 miles?
Yeah.
You need 30 to 45 grams an hour. 30 grams of carbs is a bottle of Lucozade Sport. 45 grams of carbs is 2 gels. So as soon as you hit that threshold, you need to start practicing. Here's the interesting thing. I'm assuming this lady is talking about gut cramps. 90% of runners get gut issues, GID, in some way, shape, or form, whether it be diarrhea, fecal urgency during running, nausea, vomiting, or just sheer pain. One of the key things to avoid that is training your gut. So your intestines have a massive degree of plasticity, and how we prep someone to be ready for race day, we force carb feeding in long runs and when they're under pressure. So let's say as part of a marathon block, you have a tempo run or you have a block of K or 2K reps. I would have athletes taking carb drinks or gels when they're in the middle of that intense block. So that is the best way to force an adaptive response in your gut. So it takes about 15 to 17 exposures of carbohydrates when you're under aerobic pressure, or you're starting to get quite tired, like the end of a long run, before you get an uptick in the amount of carbohydrate receptors in your intestinal tract. So if I biopsied an athlete I'm working with in their intestines, if I could do such a thing, 4 months apart, intestinal makeup is completely different. It's optimized for absorbing carbohydrates. That's a key thing for minimizing risk of gut issues. And if it's something you're worried about, in tandem, you can also use high-strength probiotics, specifically that have acidophilus and bifidobacterium strains. They can actually increase the amount of SGLT1 transporters in that intestinal wall. So that's what you use to take in. I never remember if it's fructose or glucose type sugars. One of those transporters is for a specific type of sugar. I never remember which is which, but that's the general thing you would need to do. After that, it boils down to what you eat on race day and how you eat acutely right before a session. But from a prep perspective, that's the gist of it.
Perfect. So if you're talking 15 to 17 exposures, just to make sure that we're getting this right.
Yeah.
Essentially, if you think like marathon, now I do long runs. I never take any carbs, but I'm not trying to get ready for a marathon. But if we're talking about 4-month build, we're practicing taking on carbs or taking on the fluids like at least once a week on our long run. But as you're even saying, if we're doing a session or a workout on Wednesday with our long run or kind of another workout on Saturday, in those ones, we should even be practicing taking in some carbohydrate and fluid to get the gut to adapt, get the gut to adapt quicker, so that we should have, as you said, 15 to 17 exposures.
100%.
Hey, that's great.
And I suppose devil's advocate here, but if you are doing big blocks of training with intensity mixed in, one of the key things you're at risk of as an endurance athlete is low energy availability. I'm putting on my research hat here now, because let's say you, for example, would be my study cohort, elite male endurance athlete.
Yeah.
What we know, you can eat your calories, you can meet your calorie requirements. Let's say you track on MyFitnessPal, you need 3,000, you eat 3,000. You might think, job done. Not necessarily. If you do a lot of your training in a low glycogen availability or low energy state, as in you haven't eaten for a while in advance and you don't have a high carb intake around that, that can elicit all of the same myriad of symptoms as Red S or female athlete triad can. It's the same thing. You can get what's called within day energy deficiency, and it can be just as dangerous.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to that in a second. As you said, that's an interesting one for males that we don't think about that. I want to try get the balance between, because it would be interesting. It's like to get the balance between, say, what do you think? This will be a little bit of a tangent, guys. We'll be back on the marathon thing in 2 seconds. Okay. Skip forward here 5 minutes if you want. But what do you think then of, like, I sometimes see people out running and they're just not going fast, but yet they might then be having a Lucid. And I'm like, you've probably taken in more calories than you've actually burned. So say we're not getting ready for a marathon there, but someone's doing a workout. Like, for that person, like, should we leave the isotonics alone? Because I'd be thinking, okay, maybe a little bit of water with salt, or is that completely wrong?
It's not completely wrong. I wouldn't say it's completely correct either. Let's say you take a recreational athlete. Yeah. Definitely true, the same energy output does not apply. However, most people will burn somewhere between 5 and 10 calories per kg per hour of exercise. They'll be somewhere in that range.
Yes. Yeah. And they're still working at the same, say this person's, I'm going to say like, say training 5 times a week, 2 workouts in it, maybe 1 long run.
Yeah. I would say if the person is trying to lose weight, I would probably still get them to fuel during exercise. So from that stance, if you have someone trying to lose weight, which a lot of people are concurrently recreationally active for the purpose of weight loss, what we know about dietary behavior is if you have someone's blood glucose and it drops or plummets secondary to aerobic exercise that hasn't been paid for with carbs, they're much more likely to experience cravings, comfort eating, or a hyperphagic drive. It's a perfectly natural and rational response to having low blood sugar. So not taking on carbs around exercise, even if it's easy, even if it's steady state, will drop your blood sugar. Interesting, what's the word I'm trying to think of here? Interesting paradox. You see it in type 1 diabetics. Easy aerobic exercise will drop blood sugar. Difficult, high-intensity exercise will spike it. Because the more the intensity, the more you get a stress response, catecholamine release. It starts to break down glycogen at a much higher rate and blood sugar climbs. So that's just a small point of nuance. But to come back to your question, from a weight loss perspective, it's all about calories, calorie balance. We want to avoid cravings. Nighttime cravings are where most people do a lot of the damage.
Yeah.
But we also want to honor the training they're doing and keep them as healthy as possible. So if people could, I don't know if there's going to be video snippets of this, but I'll visualize it for you. Let's say in a 24-hour day, if you train at noon, you want the vast majority of your calories to be coming in 3 hours before and after that session, because that's where the energy demands of your day are at their absolute highest. So most of your calories are concentrated around where you're doing the work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And like I would do that. Like, so say for me, what I'll do is generally I'll go, hopefully it depends if I'm working, but say day off or just working at my own volition. I'll get up, or say around 7, I'd have like porridge with honey, flaxseed and some cinnamon. I'll have my kind of liter of water with a bit of like lemon juice. May or may not have anything else then I'll, like say for 2-3 hours, we'll go for my run. Now it's a big bowl of porridge. I do have like, I'll go do the run. I've never ever done, because the longest I've done is like a 10-mile race. Like obviously I've ran maybe 18 miles is the longest long run I've done. Was it 18 miles? No, maybe 16, sorry, 16 miles. Would have come home, would after every like easy run or long run, I'll have like a spinach smoothie. So it'll be like kale or frozen spinach, a banana, a scoop of protein powder, and then like almond or oat milk generally. Have that, and I then will eat more like within those 3 hours. I'll be conscious of like, I'll have an early dinner. I usually try to have my dinner in the day. I'll have probably an apple. And then in the evening, to avoid cravings, I always have like, I'll have my normal, like I have either 2 pita breads or like a wrap, 2 wraps. And I'll always have like another bowl of porridge at nighttime, say an hour or 2 before bed. So it's just I just always find it difficult to know where to load up, obviously for a marathon, but I'd never consider like taking a gel or anything like that.
I think it's an athlete kind of, don't want to say bravado, because I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I wouldn't take a gel in anything less than 20 miles. I'm like, great that you can do that. You shouldn't do that.
Yes, yeah.
You should fuel up more often than you shouldn't. I'll put it to you this way. The research on fat adaptation, which is the only argument you could make for why you wouldn't fuel up in training, has shown that fat adapted athletes have higher VO2 maxes, but they're significantly slower, and the exercise they do feels harder at any given intensity.
Yeah.
There's no benefit. So with that research kind of base being there, the general guideline is to load up around training. That's where you do it. It sounds like you do that anyway.
Would that be appropriate, what I said there?
I was listening to it. If I was to change anything, it would be what you have right after your workout. So what you have is healthy for sure, but the composition of that smoothie doesn't allow for rapid carbohydrate absorption because there's kind of a matrix of things there. There's a good bit of fiber and some healthy fats in that. So that will slow down the gastric emptying rate of that total.
What is, the spinach is the kale is the fiber.
Kale, you said there was a banana, some protein, kale. What else did you say was in it?
That's generally it. So protein, kale, banana, and then there's oat milk as the, instead of milk.
Okay, so you don't really have much fat in that. Fiber content of the kale would still slow that down. Do you know what the gastric emptying rate of a high fiber meal is?
No, not at all.
About 4 hours. Same for fat, high fat meals, about 4 hours. High protein meal, hour or two, depending on if it's solid or liquid, because it has to be broken down. Generally speaking, simple carbs like just a banana, just an energy gel, just a glass of juice, 20, 30 minutes. So what we want to jump off the back of is after training, you're still very insulin sensitive and glucose transport is still through the roof. And the research has shown that athletes who get at least 0.5 grams per kg of body weight of high GI carbs, so sugary carbs, basically half your weight in sugary carbs, right after a workout, their glycogen tank fills up about 2/3 quicker than athletes who don't do that, which is massively significant for hepcidin circulation. So if you have issues with iron, paying attention to that is key. It has a direct impact on circulating levels of white blood cells. So you can get immunosuppression if your recovery is poor or constantly interrupted. Your recovery itself can be dampened in terms of the potency of a muscle protein synthetic response if you don't get that post-workout carb hit and pre-nailed. So I would say if you were a client, hypothetically, I would just be saying, just have the banana and a glass of juice. Leave the smoothie till another time during the day to break a 3 or 4 hour period between the meals. But otherwise, fine. Yeah.
That's so funny because then, I would think then that having another, as you said, it's really great to have you on because it's just getting mindset shifts that I would have it in my head. I'm not going to have 2 bananas in a day. That's just too much sugar. But you're saying if I have a banana, and I wouldn't drink orange juice because it causes the sugar content. Honestly, that would be a treat for me now. I have ice cream on a Saturday, but I don't eat sugary, those yogurts. I don't have orange juice.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like them. It's just I'm not trying to take those in. So I wouldn't even have 2 bananas for the same reason, because I'd be thinking generally, but that's too much sugar. But you're saying maybe this will actually help with a lot of stuff. Having a glass of orange juice with a banana, leaving that kind of absorb quickly in the 20 to 30 minutes, and then maybe in an hour just have my smoothie.
Yeah. So the key thing there, the key difference is context. Now, it would be terrible advice from a dietitian to say, just eat loads of sugar whenever. The difference is it's during or right after training where your blood glucose tends to dip anyway. If it's aerobic stuff, you would struggle to keep your blood glucose steady even with carb feeding, especially after workouts. So it doesn't have that same kind of metabolic effect. Metabolically speaking, someone who is currently or just exercise in that exercise state, sugar is kind of managed very differently versus at rest. So the cardiometabolic outcomes of that are significantly different.
Okay, perfect. Another question I just had there before I get back to being selfish here. Half marathons then, or 10 miles. Again, when I did I did 10 miles inside 50 minutes. We wouldn't take no water, no nothing. Just would fuel up before that. I'd have a Lucozade, say, from 2 hours to 1 hour before that, and then I would just be on water, kind of sipping again, not to be overly hydrated. We'd have caffeine or whatever. But then once we start that race, I'm not taking on anything, and that would seem to be the elite the elite people I run with, no one would be taking on anything. Now, is that different because of the timer out there for your more recreational runner doing a 10 mile or doing a half marathon? And then, let's just answer that first. Is it different for the recreational runner? Should they be taking gels even for like 10 miles or half marathons?
Probably not, no.
Perfect.
If you're a half marathon runner and it's taking you 2 hours, yes, because you're out quite a while. Glycogen.
When would you take the first gel then? 90 minutes? An hour?
Probably the hour mark. Probably take one at the hour mark, and maybe if you're tending towards being heavily glycolytic, or even there's variations in metabolic flexibility, and I know VO2 max testing is becoming more commonplace now, but you'll see that someone's exercise economy has a huge impact on how many calories they burn per hour of exercise, which then tells us how much carbs they need. So it's a fact that some people will hit the wall quicker than others, but generally for a half marathon or a 10 miler, you should be fine with your body's innate glycogen store. You might do a bit of a carb load in advance, 8 to 10 grams per kg the day before to normalize those levels. And your pre-tactics would be high carb, and that should get you through. If that doesn't get you through, you have bigger problems in poor performance.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. Okay, so for most people, even a 90-minute half marathon runner, we can probably just do what we have. So it's more these fueling. And if you're doing a marathon, we're starting that from like, say, all the way out. Okay, we're going back to some of the marathon questions now again. So we had another person who'd echoed Joan's question. She had particular gastro problems, though, as colon removed due to ulcerative colitis 25 years ago. Have struggled to take on gels and ran my fastest marathon on just a few sips of water. Also feel sick in marathons after 1 or 2 gels. Have been trying to adapt to the gels in hard, long running training, but is the Martane drink possibly a better option for someone like me? Now, that's obviously a very specific question. So,
well, I would say if you have your colon removed, that should be irrelevant for what we're talking about. Yeah, we're talking about.
Yeah, that's the very end of this chain, basically.
Yeah, it shouldn't be relevant for marathon running. I would say. I'll pause there for a sec. Can you hear the toddler in the background?
No.
Cool. I'll answer the question. You might have to note down. When I'm editing, I make a note of how far into the thing I am.
And I ain't editing this. They're hearing. He has a toddler, lads. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. That's fine.
They love the realness.
The luxury life of a sports dietitian.
Well, I have someone who's doing it, but I'll let it roll in.
No worries. So to answer the question, it shouldn't be relevant in the slightest if that person has no colon. Also, there'll be no clear indication to use Martin gels, again, for reasons aforementioned. If you're struggling with the Martin, you're better off trying something like High Five, or you're better off starting with liquids. So the more viscous the product you're taking, or the more concentrated it is, the harder it is to stomach. Anything over a 6% solution for a runner is more likely to cause GI distress. So I would start with a bog standard Lucozade Sport. And if that doesn't work, you could try lower osmolarity options like maltodextrin. And if you really want to splash out in the bougie, you can try highly branched cyclic dextrin. That has the absolute lowest osmolarity of any carb that exists. So that should be very easy to tolerate. Those single source carbs they're also non-fermentable. So if someone has colonic issues, or there's even perturbations to peristalsis, or they might have concurrent IBS or IBD, you might find that fermentation problems or FODMAPs can be problematic. And FODMAP is an acronym that we use in dietetics. It's fructo-oligodimonosaccharides and polyols. It's a general umbrella term for different types of fibers, sugar, alcohols, and carb molecules that can cause gastric distress. Fructose is one of them. It's a common ingredient in sports products.
Brilliant. That's actually brilliant. So, Michael, that's great advice. And I think that'll help a lot of people that, if you do have issues, just look at that 6% and come down. And we went on this podcast, we go from as basic as a €1, isotonic and get in the shop to as bougie as I can't even pronounce the word he said. So I think they're great options, as you said. And that's the importance of that 15 to 17 exposures, practicing different ones. Yeah. Start low and see what you can tolerate. Really good. Okay. You mentioned this already. And actually Fred, one of the people on our course, asked, do you use carb loading? Does it make sense? Is it better to eat pasta and white rice in the days before the marathon? How do you feel on carb loading? What's your stance on that?
Definitely not for a 10-miler, unless you're...
No, we'll go back to marathons now, sorry.
Back to marathon, yes. And I just wanted to clarify one thing. An elite athlete in a 10-mile race, like you, Eoin, you will tear through your body's glycogen stores easily in a 10-mile race in totality because of the intensity you're working at. A recreational athlete will not. So an elite athlete can rip through their glycogen stores in a 10K as well. Not necessarily a 5K, 10K upwards, yes. So for elite guys, carb loading can be relevant for 10K onwards.
That's actually really interesting. I would never, obviously I ran say 29 minutes. No, I would be conscious, but I'd be conscious of, and I'm doing cross countries, but that's great to know that, I would prepare the same. I would have the same porridge or whatever, but I think that's a great advice for, your elite or sub-elite club runners. Make sure that you're eating. I'm going to do that this weekend, eat a lot more carbs. This is half podcast, half free consultation with Evan.
For old Fred here asking the question, I would say carb loading tactics aim for 10 times your weight in kilos. So if I weigh 80 kilos, for example, I'd need 800 grams of carbs a day before. I tend to advise people to go for the white options, the white breads, white rice, white pasta, for the simple reason that we don't really want someone to have a high fiber intake the day before an endurance event. If they do, they're much more likely to have a lot of fecal mass built up. So we're opting for low residue diet. Basically, when you hear residue, think how much of what you're eating becomes poo eventually. So for 24 to 36 hours before a marathon, 10 times your weight in carbs, keep it white, probably ditch the veggies the day beforehand, wouldn't be having any bowls of bran flakes, white rice, white pasta, Rice Krispies, Cocoa Pops actually go to. I have no less than 5 Olympic athletes who eat Cocoa Pops who work with me. So that's one thing.
Just before it or all the time?
Just in general. They train so much, it's a daily thing. Pancake.
You're giving a lot of people hope here.
I know, yeah.
A lot of people are going to start marathon training right now, I think.
I get accused of being a big shill for Kellogg's. I am not sponsored by Kellogg's. Wish I was.
Kellogg's can get on this podcast if they want to sponsor us. We'll insert the old the monkey in here. Throw on the old Cocoa Pops ad.
But if I was on commission with Kellogg's, I'd be rolling in it right now. The amount of people I have eaten Cocoa Pops and Rice Krispies is absolutely scandalous. But it's because it serves that purpose. Easy to eat, hyper palatable, not very filling. A limiting factor in someone's capacity to carb load is being full or feeling sick from eating so much. So you keep it to those light options, and it's generally very easy to manage.
Because I was going to say that again, we've talked about practicing your gels. Should you practice carbo loading just for, say if I'm trying to run a PB the next day, I want to kind of feel normal. Do you know what I mean? So for me, if I had to eat 700 grams of carb. Now I don't measure any of that. I'd have to, I don't know how, you must be easy measurements around there. But if I had to double, say, my carb intake the day before, I don't know if I'd feel terrible on the day and then be like, God, I'm not feeling right for this race. Do you know? So say for 2 weeks out, would you recommend people maybe do it this weekend or what?
So for the last 2 or 3 long runs before a marathon, that's when I would have a client do their practice carb load, so they know what they're doing 4 weeks out.
Excellent.
And
okay,
anecdotally, no one's ever said they feel terrible the next day, but that's because we go for the lower fiber approach. If you eat 800 grams of carbs, 700 grams of carbs, high fiber, you could be so constipated you might need an enema.
Yeah. So, it's gonna be a rough day for you, I think.
Oh yeah, tough day at the office. That's another stipulation there. It's not healthy eating guidelines. I'm very well aware of that. But it has that sports specific purpose. So a lot of people try and conflate sports nutrition with healthy eating or food.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Not the same thing at all.
They're not the same thing at all.
Very different.
Even I always say that to people, like we give sample trainings, and you'll see the marathon one or kind of 10K and above is very running focused, but I have a general fitness one because I like what people think elite running is. It's like, if I wasn't an elite runner, I would be doing, well, I do Pilates anyway, but I'd be doing gym. I would be doing like a mixture of things to keep it. And it's the same when you see people, when we're talking about drinking Lucozades or taking on these carbs, this is for like a specific race. Would you say now, so I think it's only 2 weeks from this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
If people haven't done any carb loading, should they just practice this weekend? I know their long run might be only like 90 minutes or even less. Would you just say, let's try it one time, just be confident for it?
I would, yeah, definitely.
Okay, get on the Cocoa Pops. Tell them Evan and Owen sent you. Use promo code podcast at the till. See if some. Let's get that going.
Just for reference, right? A spud has 30 grams of carbs in it. A medium spud has 30 grams of carbs. Slice of bread is 15. A normal bowl of cereal is about 25. A 40-gram bowl of cereal is 25 grams of carbs with milk. They can be up to 30.
Brilliant.
Depending on the cereal, of course. Bagels are about 50 Gs. Bag of microwave rice is 60 grams. Bananas 25. So, there are ways to tot it up. But just even to see the sheer scale of it, like 700 grams is 23 and a bit spuds. Okay,
perfect. Some of these were asked already. So one, we said, what would you recommend for a race strategy? How many gels an hour for a sub 3 hour marathon athlete? Got some good freaking athletes on my program. Yeah. That's a woman as well. The sub 3 is very good.
So Ursula, I would say 2 gels an hour. If you're a 2.5 hour runner, 4 gels. If you're 2:45, probably keep it to 5 gels. Have your maybe space them 25 minutes apart. There'd be no point in taking a gel 30 minutes from or 15 minutes from the finish line. Or you can do 4 gels, and for your last carb hit, you can do mouth rinsing if you don't actually want to take the gel. So mouth rinsing, it's exactly what it sounds like. You just squirt the stuff in your mouth and spit it out again. It actually has the same performance impact as swallowing the gel. So if you're worried about your gut and you want the benefit, but not the gastric risk, mouth rinse. It's a perceptual effect, so it's only transient, but it's enough to get you the last 20 minutes of a race.
Brilliant. So even in the last 20 minutes, we can do mouth rinsing. We don't actually have to even take it down. Still get that same benefit. Definitely want to chop this one. That's going to be a minute short somewhere on YouTube or TikTok, 100%. Okay. And then I have a couple other questions, but is there any specific foods or fluids to avoid the day before or the morning of the race?
Broccoli, bran flakes, Guinness. I suppose it's easier to say what to opt for than what to avoid because
I don't think people are having the broccoli Guinness breakfast.
Beige carbohydrate.
Don't say you don't get the absolute gold on this podcast. Don't drink Guinness and don't eat broccoli for breakfast on the day of a marathon.
It's very useful information. I don't know what you're talking about. Generally speaking, you'll not go wrong if you aim at beige carbohydrates, beige or a white or off-white. Like that's normally every food I can think of that's appropriate fits into that description. Bananas, pancakes, Rice Krispies, porridge, bread, bagels. They're all beige or near beige. That makes sense?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go specific on that though. And then I have one, that was Paddy's question. Paddy had a kind of two-parter there. So probably we can go then. This is flown. What is the diet? Okay, so let's say like they seem to be a lot of 3 hour marathons, which is very quick. So let's go 3 hour 30. I think it's more appropriate. 3 hour 30 marathon runner. The day before, we're trying to get like double the weight in carbs. We're cutting out vegetables the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And we might just practice that, like say, 2 weeks or a week before as well.
Mm-hmm.
On the morning then,
Yeah.
We're paying you. We're like, you're a consultant for us. What do you recommend? Is it, I always have porridge. Are you saying that's, and I had porridge, I said flaxseed and honey. Am I leaving out the flaxseed now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's something I'm going to do, because I had that for, say, a 10K. I'd always just have the same. Fruit, is that gone? Or is it just stick on the bananas, stick on the stuff like that?
Stick to bananas and dried fruit, low fiber, high sugar, does the job. 3 hours before your race, you're looking for around twice your weight in carbs. So it'll be about 140 grams at breakfast for you. So that would be about 60 grams of oats with milk, about a tablespoon of honey, a banana, and a glass of orange juice. That gets you somewhere near that. You might have to have a slice of toast as well. I'm trying to think. This is off the top of my head now, by the way, for anyone.
Yeah. No, I won't hold you to it. But it's just, I said this is good advice for people. So I'll do that 3 hours beforehand. Would you recommend 3 hours? Because I usually go, when I'm eating, I have my last, say, if I'm going to eat, if I was having porridge, I'd have it like 4 hours, but maybe I'm doing shorter runs, like 10Ks and stuff. So usually I will go 4 hours, and then 2.5 hours before I'll go for like one of those Nutrigrain 11s, the chocolate chip ones. I'll have that, and I'll be sipping, as I said, that Lucozade from 2 hours to 1 hour before.
Yeah, I would say that's probably leaving you low carbs by the time you get to your run.
Oh, right. Yeah,
it is.
Okay, so I should be maybe having something more substantial closer to the race.
The 3 hour mark, 2.5, 3 hours for what we just described there. An hour and a half out is a good time to get like that Nutrigrain bar or a banana or a slice of bread with some jam in it. Around 30 grams of carbs just to stoke your blood sugar. And if you want, then you can start your pre-hydration tactics. So the best way to pre-hydrate, so you're on the race line in neutral hydration status, not underhydrated, is drink 5 times your weight in isotonic. So for you, I think you said you're 70 kilos.
Yeah.
That'd be around 350 mils of Lucozade Sport sipped in that 90-minute period all the way to the start line. So it should take you that long. It's about the equivalent of a can of Coke size bolus of fluid. It should take you an hour and a half to drink that.
Yeah, because what I do is I take that from 2 hours to 1 hour, because I just don't like that feeling in my stomach. So I know things are variable, but that's brilliant advice. So we're saying then that for the normal person, we're 3 hours before, we're going double our carbs. Yeah. You're looking. So we're going 3 hours before, it's double the carbs. Then it's 90 minutes before, we're doing 30 grams of carbohydrate, like just a slice of bread with jam. And then we're sipping Lucozade, and you're nearly sipping Lucozade to the line, about 350 mils. Yeah. Are you supplementing that with water or?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so people tend to like go way overboard on water. They end up hypohydrated, or
yeah, I totally agree with that.
Needing to pee, or worse yet, have a big bolus of fluid in a small space of time can kick off a gastrocolic reflex, which can make you need to poo. Babies do, when you give them bottles, they poop very shortly after having a bolus of liquid. We're just big babies, technically. One thing I forgot to mention there was caffeine.
Yeah.
So for marathon purposes, you can take your caffeine about an hour and a half pre-race. Once consumed, it's about 45 minutes before that's peaking in your bloodstream, but it has a half-life of 6 hours.
6 hours, yeah. I always tell the people that don't try time that too close to the race.
Yeah, I just said it'd be better to mention it here.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And that comes to the last question of the day. Is there any core supplements possibly specific to distance runners that you recommend?
Beetroot juice is a reasonably good one. It can improve oxygen transport, vasodilation. It can increase actually the economy of muscle contractions, which is new research and pretty interesting.
Is that for elite runners or just recreational? Because I used to take beetroot and then I stopped because I read something that it doesn't work as well on elite athletes.
Yeah. The reason being, let's say it's I'm going to mess up the name of this. The law of diminishing gains.
Yes. Yeah. Law of diminished margin returns.
Yes. The more adapted you are to sports in terms of physiology, the less margin there is for improving like your vasodilatory response. Your arteries can only widen so much. So if you're well trained, a shot of butyrate giving you about 4 to 6 millimoles of nitrate does nothing, like very little.
Yeah.
If your VO2 max is below 65, and that's the cutoff in the literature based on this, VO2 max below 65, performance enhancement. The lower your VO2 max is, the better it works.
Brilliant.
But the nuanced element there is it that there's no effect, or do athletes need a higher dose? So what's commonplace, and what I do with athletes, particularly well-trained guys, is they'll double shot 2 hours before a race.
Okay, brilliant.
So
might get back on that. Just to tell people, because I've recommended that before, your pee will go red. You are not bleeding. It's just the truth. You would be surprised. I had one guy who thought you'd have to go to a GP, but no, it's just your pee will go red. Honestly, after a race, if you've done a long race, it's like, oh God, I think I had a problem. Evan, this was so good. I think if people are listening, please give it a like. Evan Lynch Fit Nut. What's the name of the podcast again?
The Fuel Better Podcast.
The Fuel Better Podcast. You can get that on Spotify. I'd love to have you back again, Evan. I think people on our course are going to be kicking themselves that they didn't ask more questions. So if people have other questions, me and Evan are on first name basis, even if sometimes the first names aren't correct.
Yeah.
Little internal joke there. I texted him yesterday. I was like, oh, hi. And I came up as Adam. I was like, hi, Adam, you ready for the podcast tomorrow? And he just says, yeah, no problem, Steve. Which I laughed at a lot. I thought that was brilliant. I think we've given some golden advice of how to fuel, how to look at the diet the day before, on just good stuff in general, just about general athletes' diets. And look forward to you starting your PhD down with us. And I will definitely be listening to that podcast. So Evan, thank you so much again.
My pleasure.